The crowd erupts in a deafening roar, the kind that shakes the very foundation of an arena. Bright lights flood the ring, illuminating the two men standing across from each other, two warriors from entirely different worlds, yet both legends in their own right. One, a destructive force of nature, the most feared boxer of his era, a man whose punches could shatter bones, Mike Tyson. The other, an Olympic gold medalist turned wrestling icon, a man who has taken on giants and never backed down, Kurt Angle. This is more than just a fight. It's a clash of styles, a war of dominance, a battle that no one ever thought possible. And yet, here they are, staring each other down, fists clenched, muscles coiled, as the world watches in stunned anticipation. Few matchups have ever felt this unpredictable. Tyson, the embodiment of raw aggression, a man who has ended fights in seconds with a single vicious strike. A warrior forged in the fires of Brooklyn, hardened by a life that demanded survival above all else. There was never a fight he entered without bad intentions, never an opponent who didn't feel the weight of his fury. On the other side, Angle, a technician, a tactician, a wrestler who built his career on breaking men down, pushing them beyond their limits, and forcing them to submit. He wasn't just strong, he was relentless, an athlete with an unbreakable will, someone who could take punishment and come back even stronger. If Tyson was the storm, then Angle was the immovable object standing in its way. But how did we even get here? How did two champions from such different battlegrounds find themselves locked in a fight that no one could have predicted? The journey to this moment wasn't just about competition. It was about respect, pride, and proving once and for all who the true alpha was. For years, fans debated what would happen if Tyson, with his devastating knockout power, faced someone who wasn't bound by boxing's rules. What if he went up against a grappler, a man who could take him to the mat and neutralize his punches? Would Tyson's ferocity be enough to overcome a wrestler's control? Or would Angle's discipline and technique dismantle one of the most feared fighters in history? Speculation turned into whispers, whispers into challenges, and soon, the impossible became a reality. Neither man was one to walk away from a fight. Tyson, though past his prime, never lost his hunger for battle, and Angle, despite years in the wrestling business, was no stranger to real combat. When the opportunity arose, whether through pride, competition, or a simple need to prove themselves, both men agreed. This was more than just entertainment. This was personal. The night was electric, the atmosphere tense. Every eye in the arena locked onto the ring as the final seconds before the fight slipped away. Tyson rolled his shoulders, his expression unreadable, but those who knew him could see the fire in his eyes. He had been doubted before, questioned, tested, but when the bell rang, all that mattered was the man in front of him. Angle, pacing like a predator, his jaw clenched, knew this was different from anything he had faced before. He had wrestled giants, fought some of the most dangerous men in the world, but this was Tyson. One mistake, one opening, and it could all be over in the blink of an eye. The referee stepped forward, laying out the rules, though everyone knew once the fight began, rules would mean little. This was a war. Tyson bounced on his feet, the intensity radiating off him, while Angle crouched slightly, ready to react at a moment's notice. Then the bell rang. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Then Tyson exploded forward. A missile locked onto its target, his fists already in motion. But Angle was no ordinary man, and he had come prepared. He had studied every fight, every movement, every tell Tyson had ever shown in the ring. He wasn't going to make this easy. The first exchange would set the tone, the first moment of impact deciding who would take control. And as Tyson's fist came rocketing forward, Angle made his move. Angle ducked, his instincts firing at the last possible second. Tyson's fist sliced through the air just inches from his head, the sheer force of it enough to send a gust of wind past his ear. That was all the warning he needed. This wasn't just another fight. This was a man who had built his legacy on destruction, a fighter who had turned his opponents into cautionary tales. But Kurt Angle wasn't just any opponent. He had spent his entire career facing the impossible, rising above the odds, and proving that technique, discipline, and sheer willpower could overcome even the most dangerous adversaries. The crowd barely had time to react before Angle lunged, his body moving like a coiled spring releasing its tension. He shot low, his arms wrapping around Tyson's waist, muscles straining as he attempted to lift the heavyweight off his feet. But Tyson was no ordinary man. His balance, his raw power, these were things that couldn't be measured by technique alone. With a sudden twist of his hips, Tyson resisted, shoving Angle back with a force that nearly sent him stumbling. But Angle adjusted mid-motion, regaining control, eyes locked on Tyson, who was already coming forward again, his fists ready to unleash another storm. For those watching, this was more than just a contest between two athletes. It was a collision of philosophies. Tyson was aggression personified, a fighter who had always lived by the rule that offense was the best defense. He knew only one way to fight: forward, relentless, overwhelming. His career had been built on the principle that fear could win a fight before the first punch was thrown. Angle, on the other hand, was a strategist, a man who had spent years perfecting the art of breaking opponents down. He wasn't just a wrestler. He was an Olympic gold medalist, a competitor who had trained his entire life to control chaos, to dictate the pace of a match, and to force even the strongest opponents into positions where they had no choice but to submit. But Tyson wasn't someone who submitted. Not to pain, not to pressure, not to anyone. The fight continued, each second packed with tension so thick it felt like the walls of the arena were closing in. Tyson threw another punch, this one aimed lower, trying to cut off Angle's movement. Angle twisted away, his footwork keeping him just outside the range of danger. He knew he couldn't afford to take one of those punches clean. No one could. The key was getting inside, closing the distance, making sure Tyson's fists couldn't generate their full destructive power. But that was easier said than done. For the audience, the stakes went beyond just winning or losing. This was about legacies. Tyson had nothing left to prove in boxing, but this was different. This was a fight in a world where rules were looser, where the strengths of different combat styles clashed in unpredictable ways. And for Angle, this was a chance to prove that wrestling wasn't just about entertainment. It was a legitimate form of combat, one that could hold its own against the most dangerous strikers in history. Both men had entered this fight with something to prove, and neither was willing to be the one who walked away defeated. As the fight progressed, the intensity only grew. Tyson's attacks came in rapid bursts, hooks, uppercuts, body shots that landed with the force of a sledgehammer. Even when they didn't connect fully, they carried enough power to make Angle respect every move Tyson made. But Angle wasn't backing down. He was waiting, watching, looking for the perfect moment to strike. And then it happened. Tyson overextended just slightly, but enough. In that instant, Angle reacted, moving faster than anyone expected. He slipped under Tyson's arm, his hands locking around the former champion's torso. With a sudden explosion of strength, he lifted Tyson off his feet, slamming him into the mat with a force that sent a shockwave through the ring. The crowd erupted, half in disbelief, half in pure adrenaline-fueled excitement. But this wasn't over. Not even close. Tyson wasn't the type of man to stay down. And as he pushed himself back up, something in his eyes changed. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was war. Tyson's hands pressed against the mat, his breathing sharp and deliberate as he pushed himself back up. There was no hesitation, no moment of shock, just pure, unfiltered determination. Angle had thrown him down, made the impossible happen in front of thousands. But if anyone thought that would break him, they didn't understand who they were dealing with. Tyson wasn't wired like other fighters. He didn't dwell on setbacks. He didn't stop to process pain. If anything, That slam had only fueled the fire burning inside him. Angle knew better than to hesitate. He rushed forward, aiming to keep the momentum on his side, but Tyson was already back on his feet. The second Angle reached for him. Tyson reacted with the kind of speed that defied expectation. A brutal left hook cut through the space between them, catching Angle just enough to send a jolt through his body. He felt the power behind it, not a full connection, but enough to serve as a warning. Another inch to the right, and that punch could have ended everything. But he didn't have time to think about what-ifs. Tyson pressed forward, unloading a series of punches so fast and violent that the entire ring seemed to shrink under their intensity. Angle did everything he could to evade them, his footwork keeping him just outside of Tyson's full range, but he knew he couldn't dance forever. Tyson wasn't just powerful, he was relentless. Every dodge, every sidestep, every moment spent trying to stay out of reach was another moment closer to exhaustion. And once exhaustion set in, the fight would no longer be his to control. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Just when it seemed like Tyson was fully in control, an unexpected shift in strategy changed everything. Angle didn't back away. He stepped in. Rather than continue evading, he made the kind of gamble only a wrestler of his caliber could pull off. As Tyson launched another punch, Angle ducked low and drove forward, wrapping his arms around Tyson's legs with unshakable force. Before Tyson could react, he was off his feet again, crashing into the mat with another takedown. The crowd erupted in a frenzy, voices clashing between shock and awe. But this time, Angle wasn't letting him back up so easily. He maneuvered with surgical precision, locking Tyson's arm and pressing his weight down to limit movement. Tyson thrashed, his raw strength making every second a battle. But Angle wasn't just relying on strength, he was using every ounce of his technical skill to force Tyson into a vulnerable position. This was what he had trained for his entire life, and he knew if he could maintain control just a little longer, he could shift the fight in his favor for good. Then something happened that changed the entire dynamic. Tyson, pinned to the mat, his breathing heavy, stopped struggling. Not out of exhaustion, not out of defeat, but because he was calculating. He had spent years in the ring, years fighting men who believed they could break him, and every single time, he had found a way to turn the tide. He had never been a wrestler, never trained for this kind of fight. But he understood combat in a way few men did. And in that moment, when Angle thought he had control, Tyson saw his opening. With an explosive burst of energy, Tyson twisted his body, using sheer force to rip free from Angle's grip. Before Angle could react, Tyson was already up, already moving, his fists loaded with the kind of power that ended careers. He wasn't just fighting to win anymore. He was fighting to send a message. Angle barely had time to brace himself as Tyson came at him with a right hand that felt like it carried the weight of every fight he had ever won. It landed flush, sending shockwaves through Angle's entire body, and for the first time in the fight, he stumbled back, his vision flashing white for a split second. The crowd gasped, the momentum shifting again in a battle that had already defied every expectation. But the fight wasn't over yet. Not even close. And both men knew that the next few moments would determine everything. Angle shook his head, trying to steady himself, but the force of Tyson's punch was unlike anything he had ever felt. His instincts screamed at him to move, to recover, but Tyson was already closing in, his fists like wrecking balls ready to bring the fight to its brutal end. The crowd sensed it the moment they had been waiting for. One more clean shot, and this war would be over. Tyson stepped in, his right hand cocked back, ready to throw the kind of punch that had ended careers. But Angle wasn't finished. At the last possible second, he did the only thing that could save him. He dropped. Not out of exhaustion, not out of defeat, but out of strategy. He went low, his body moving on pure instinct, and just as Tyson's fist came crashing forward, Angle wrapped his arms around his legs and drove with every ounce of strength left in him. The impact sent both men tumbling to the ground, but Angle was in control. He didn't just take Tyson down, he transitioned, twisting his body in one seamless motion until he had Tyson's arm trapped. The arena exploded as fans realized what was happening. Angle had locked in a submission, a textbook armbar. Tyson gritted his teeth, his muscles straining against the hold, refusing to accept the position he had been forced into. He tried to pull free, tried to use his raw power to break the grip, but Angle had spent years perfecting this exact moment. He adjusted his position, torquing the arm further, applying pressure that no amount of strength alone could escape. For the first time in the fight, Tyson wasn't just battling his opponent, he was battling time. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but every second that passed brought him closer to the breaking point. Angle knew it too. His face was etched with determination, sweat dripping from his brow as he pulled with everything he had. He wasn't just fighting to win, he was fighting to prove something. That wrestling could match the power of boxing. That technique could conquer brute force. That he could go toe-to-toe with one of the most feared fighters in history and walk away victorious. Then came the moment no one expected. Tyson, his arm locked in a hold that should have been inescapable, did something that left the entire world speechless. Instead of tapping, instead of surrendering, he let out a guttural roar and started to stand. With every muscle in his body screaming in protest, he powered through the pain, forcing himself up despite the torque on his arm. The crowd rose to their feet, disbelief flooding the arena. Angle tried to readjust, to crank the submission tighter, but Tyson's willpower defied every rule. He wasn't just refusing to lose, he was rewriting what was possible. With one final surge, Tyson used his free arm to lift Angle off the mat and slam him down with enough force to shake the entire ring. The impact broke the hold, both men collapsing in exhaustion. Neither moved at first, both fighters gasping for air, their bodies battered from the war they had just waged. Then, slowly, Tyson rolled to his knees. Angle, his body aching, forced himself up as well. The two locked eyes, the intensity between them still burning, but something had changed. There was no longer just the desire to win, there was something deeper. Respect. They had pushed each other beyond their limits, forced one another into places neither had ever been before. And in that moment, they both knew this fight wasn't about who won or lost. It was about proving they belonged in each other's world. The referee stepped in, preparing to make a call, but before he could, something incredible happened. Tyson extended his hand, a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement that Angle had given him a fight unlike any other. The crowd erupted as Angle, after a moment's hesitation, took it. There were no hard feelings, no lingering hostility, just two warriors who had left everything in the ring. As they stood in the center of the ring, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken, the realization settled in. This wasn't just a match. This was a moment in history. A clash between two icons that transcended sport, proving that greatness isn't defined by a single discipline, it's forged in the fire of competition. And on this night, both men had proven that in their own way, they were the best at what they did. As the cameras zoomed in on their faces, the energy in the arena reached its peak. The war had ended, but the legacy of this fight would live on forever.